Now, the Belarusian president says protests which have rocked his country are organized by the U.S. through social media platforms. Alexander Lukashenko stated that Washington is exploiting a small, newly emerged class of young bourgeois who want power. He said Americans acting through centers in Poland and the Czech Republic are controlling social media channels which are playing a leading role in the unrest. The Belarusian president also stated that U.S. interference is effectively a dry run for a future attempt to destabilize Russia. Now, Lukashenko has been in power in Belarus since 1994 and claimed victory in the disputed August 9th presidential race. The country has witnessed anti-government protests since then. The demonstrators say the election was massively rigged, a charge that the government strongly denies. And joining us now for this news review is Andre Vltchek, philosopher, author, and filmmaker, joining us from Istanbul, and Vladimir Golstein, lecturer at Brown University, joining us from Rhode Island. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program. I guess, Andre, we will start with you over in Istanbul. These are some powerful accusations being made by Lukashenko. Your thoughts on what's going on in Belarus and the president's narratives and theories behind who may have a hand in all of this?
Well, Lukashenko is actually absolutely correct. What is happening in Belarus is precisely what I witnessed in places like Hong Kong and even to some extent in Serbia, in Belgrade, which I recently visited. I just came back to Istanbul from Belgrade a few days ago. Now, you have to understand about the government and the system in Belarus. There is no crisis, there is no big tragedy, there is basically a very balanced, socially balanced system. The industry is working, the medical is working, education facilities are working, and so is public transportation. So a group of people who is basically bored and whom Lukashenko is calling bourgeois or young bourgeois, new bourgeois class, got bored. And they got also subsidized financially from the West, and they are doing precisely what the young kids in Hong Kong have been doing since last year. So there is nothing new. It is a coup, again, attempt by the West. It is very dangerous for Russia. And anyone who followed the situation, political, economical, and social situation in a neighboring Ukraine would understand what is in store for Belarus if they are going to follow this concept, which is pushed down their throat from the West.
Thank you, Andre. And Professor Vladimir Golstein, always a pleasure to have you on Press TV and get your perspective here on the program. Your thoughts, sir, on this power struggle we're seeing taking place in Belarus today?
Yeah, this power struggle is real, and the outline of this power struggle, I think, Andre described very well. However, I would add certain kind of fine points here, which are very relevant. For starters, Lukashenko has been acting rather erratically recently, unfortunately. So yes, fundamentals of his economy, of his state are fine. But he became probably either too confident and so on. So he allowed endless amount of Western NGOs to function in his country without providing any counterbalance. So this NGOs would appeal to young bourgeois, he calls them, and would sort of try to educate them, if you want to call brainwash, fine, but they would just try to sort of convince them that the Western way, a contemporary way, is the only way. So there was no counterbalance in terms of Lukashenko. So now he's kind of reaping, which he saw. Another thing where he kind of missed a boat somewhat is that recently he's been doing, before the election, he's been doing a fair amount of accusations against Russia and Russian soldiers whom he arrested. So, conversely, this amount of accusations, and I think he's correct about this one, but he has to earn his credibility, because he lost it somewhat. So he really has to sort of bring documents, bring data about this what is going on. I think what we see mostly, it's not so much. I don't think like Americans are directly involved. They probably support NGOs. They support certain kind of youth groups in Lithuania, in Poland. We should also mention very powerful Polish news agency Nechta, which is bombards Belarus with their particular sort of take of the events, tries to organize all this kind of uprising. So now, of course, he realizes he has a very serious situation on his hands, and he appeals to Russia and says, that's a stop for you, which is probably correct. But I would say that he his charges against the West are correct, but he should own up to some of his own mistakes.
And Andre, what is Lukashenko to do at this point? Because if the West decides to, fall on really bad terms with them, they could very well do what they did in Venezuela. Tell them, if you don't vacate, we're going to just recognize Svetlana. Bear with me, I'm going to probably get her name wrong. Takasuyova. I'm terrible with names, but what if they just decided to recognize her as a legitimate president of the country and throw the country into turmoil? So what can Lukashenko or what can the Belarusian government do at this point to keep the country above water?
Well, first of all, Lukashenko does have huge support of his people. They are really talking about not even 20%. 20% probably didn't just vote for him, but I think in general he has a great majority support. Also, Venezuela doesn't have anyone geographically next to it who would support it except Cuba, and it's across the Caribbean Sea. It is very dangerous, very actually fascist regimes next to each other, from Colombia to Brazil. While Belarus, after it actually improved its relationships with President Putin, has the enormous Russia backing it up, and so it does China and others. So to overthrow the government in Belarus would be extremely difficult. It would be very difficult in Venezuela as well, of course. And I'm working there very often. It's not at all easy for the West, and hopefully they will fail. But in Belarus, it's almost impossible, especially considering that after this, whatever you want to call it, riots or uprising, majority of people actually want to go back home and to their previous lives. It was a few weeks of excitement, but now they are not going to, majority of them are not going to risk the system, which is one of the most stable system in the former Soviet Union.
Thank you, Andre. And Vladimir, I'd like to put that same question to you. If you're the Belarus government, how do you get beyond this crisis and maintain your sovereignty at this point?
Yeah, I think he's doing now he's doing the correct thing. He negotiates with Russia, and he makes sure that he kind of works with Russia. And I think he also probably should appeal to some kind of a referendum, because yes, he has majority of the people behind him, but this minority, as we know in many other places, including Ukraine, they're unbelievably energetic, unbelievably vocal. They have support of Western media, but so he has to kind of more or less call their bluff. So he has to have, once the situation comes down, he has to have a referendum. He has to come up with a new election where he will get a new mandate. But he also probably has to promise or behave in a particular way to say, yes, our general course, let's have a referendum on it. It's correct one. But, I can sort of try tinker here and there, so young people will feel more at home, more comfortable, more confident about their own country.
Good stuff, gentlemen. Thank you both for joining us. Andre Vltchek from Istanbul and Vladimir Golstein joining us there out of Rhode Island. And viewers, that's a wrap for this segment of your Press TV's News Review. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.